Hi, my name is John Mancini. I'm the past president of AIM and president of Content Results. And I've been doing some research on the connection between HR and intelligent automation and RPA. And I wanted to share with you some of the highlights from that research. First of all, a little bit of background. The survey was done last month. And essentially what we did was qualify people based on whether they currently have an RPA implementation or whether they plan to do one within the next 12 months or so. And so we surveyed a total of 187 people. Once we dropped out the folks that have no plans in this area, there were 115. And so that's the focus of the data that I'll go through today. So when we talk about HR practices and we talk about HR best practices, I think what you should view this as a series of leading organizations, because clearly they understand the need to automate their processes. They are interested in the tools to do so. And so consider this to be a set of leading organizations. So there are three things that I wanted to talk about today. The first is the current state of HR automation. And so we asked this question. I asked like 5 basic HR processes: legal, general HR, talent management, onboarding, employee screening, and selection, and asked folks to describe the current degree of automation that exists in these major HR processes. You can see that on the left-hand side of this slide. And so what you can see is that the bulk of organizations, over on the right-hand side of this slide, are largely manual in the approach that they take to HR processes. And this represents a significant challenge for them moving forward. So it's not just the processes that are a challenge, it's the underlying information that drives those processes. And so, for example, when we ask the question for what's the best guess for the percentage of all HR information assets that's unstructured information, those are basically the things that don't fit neatly in the rows and columns of a database. It can be things like traditional documents, it can be images, it can be resumes, it can be employment forms, all that stuff. But it also can be often increasingly audio files and video files. And so what you see is that a lot of this information is unstructured in nature. I think the real challenge is when you start to look at this from the perspective of what's happening to that information. And clearly, organizations see an increase coming in terms of that information. I would hazard a guess, particularly in terms of the really unstructured stuff like audio and video files. And so if you ask them, if you say, like, what is it today? And, assume that that's X. What do you think it's going to be in 2 years? And the answer that comes back is 2.7X. So 2.7X increase, and 60 to 65% of that unstructured in nature represents a real challenge when it comes to HR process automation. So the second thing that I think I concluded from this research is that as organizations think about higher value HR is increasingly a strategic business process for organization. It's not just a question of filling out the right forms and staying in compliance, although that's important. It's a strategic process because it centers around talent management and talent administration. And so when we ask that question, do you see HR as a source of competitive advantage or as a cost center? The respondents, clearly are leading organizations. 3 out of 5 essentially see it as a source of competitive advantage. And those are very innovative organizations when it comes to HR. When we ask them to evaluate their current capabilities in a variety of areas tied to HR, what you can see is that a lot of the high valuation of current capabilities centers around the more traditional elements of HR. Things like ensuring access to documents is audited and secure, ensuring that you monitor files for compliance purposes, that kind of stuff. But it really, the next stage of this is to take those capabilities and extract greater value out of them by automating them and standardizing them. So I think this question provides some interesting context to the previous point. Which of the following do you feel is the most important benefit of RPA technologies? And RPA proponents talk a lot about higher order benefits associated with RPA. A lot of people feel that that is maybe overselling, but the data suggests it really isn't so. When you think about higher order benefits, what I'm talking about here is it's not just a question on the far right-hand side of saving time and money. Certainly that's a big justification for RPA technologies, but things like freeing HR staff to spend on higher value activities, creating more meaningful employee experience, increasing job satisfaction, those are higher order, more strategic HR benefits. And I think that's important as you think about this moving forward. So the last point I wanted to talk about is the ROI of these investments. And in terms of how long you've been using RPA technologies, you can see this is pretty new adoption in most organizations within the last year, a majority of them. And when we ask things like to evaluate their capabilities relative to some core metrics associated with HR automation, and then compared the folks that already have RPA versus RPA planned, you can see that already they're making a difference in terms of things like utilizing the cloud for HR documents, replacing paper documents with digital ones, monitoring on a regular basis employee files to ensure compliance and mitigate legal risk, getting a 360 view of what's going on. And so this is some clear benefits in a very, very short period of time. And I can tell you this from the perspective of looking at enterprise technologies in the past. People don't often have this kind of result this quickly. And I think that's important to keep in mind as you think about these technologies. And then lastly, going back to those where we started this whole equation, looking at those core processes and comparing those folks that have RPA versus RPA planned, and and looked at the people that were 75% automated or completely automated, you can see that it's made a difference. And so I think that's really an important factor in a relatively short period of time without having to rip out everything that you already have, basically adding a layer on top of it that makes those tools that you already have more successful. So just a little bit about me and then we'll close. I'm the president of Content Results, consulting firm. Work with a lot of companies in the intelligent automation business, also some of the people on the end user side. I'm the past president of AIM, and I do a lot of speaking and writing and keynoting on these topics. Thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.